but her vision of what she wanted it to be was very different from what we had designed it to be. And so eventually it was just sort of like creative differences. I don't think this is going where it should be. This is the end of our relationship. And so we kind of just got dropped, the producing partner. And that because sucks. We were so excited about the prospects, we'd been doing all of this on spec. And so we didn't get paid for any of this work that we did. And then we ended up releasing the web series, but by that time, all of our fans had like disappeared and dissipated. And so it was kind of a disaster moment of deflated dreams.
It starts with just taking that leap.
Man, you have to work hard. You have to be incredibly smart.
Choose something that even if it fails, you are going to be proud of it.
Doesn't matter how badly you got beaten in battle.
Be kind, be kind, be kind.
Become a better person, a better leader, a better business.
Go with your gut.
I'm Samuel Donner, and this is Finding Founders. You just heard Michael Tucker talking about how yet another project, a chance at being legitimized in LA's film industry, failed before it even had a chance to lift off the ground. We're going to tell you how he got to this point and past it, eventually creating the popular YouTube channel Lessons from the Screenplay. Garnering more than 5 million views on his most popular release, with a whopping 1.4 million subscribers, Michael's channel saw a meteoric rise from its launch in 2016. Yet, before he shared his knowledge of film theory and narrative structure with an audience, Michael had to learn his own lessons from the screenplay. From tracking down DVD commentaries of his favorite movies to printing out and studying the shots he was inspired by, Michael turned his childhood curiosity into a serious personal study of filmmaking. So let's rewind a bit and see how this passion started with a simple handheld camera.
Yeah, so as a kid, my dad was always into movies and very frequently had our video recorder VHS. It wasn't actually VHS. It was an 8mm, one of those handy cam cameras.
Or like a Super 8 kind of deal? Or?
Yeah, like Super 8 was the one we had the longest. And he would have that when we would go on family vacations and record things, the various goings-on of the vacations and just kind of random things around the house. And he had a lot of old like home movies that he had shot like with my mom when they would go on vacation. But pretty early on as a kid, he showed me how to use it. And so it pretty quickly went from my dad walking around with the camera to me walking around with the camera and hogging it and seeing life through the viewfinder and spending all of our, family vacations filming everything and trying to try out cool camera moves and different framings and all this stuff.
What do you think he found interesting about it, and how did he pass a little bit of that interest and discovery onto you? We'll get back to the podcast right after this break. Finding Founders is brought to you by the HubSpot Podcast Network with other wonderful shows like CEO School. CEO School, hosted by Sanira Madani, is committed to closing the gap and helping more women level up by sharing stories and strategies from powerful women in leadership. Because nothing bad happens when women make more money. There's a bunch of really cool episodes like Raising Capital, Investing Smart, and Why It's Not About You, where Sanira welcomes Arlen Hamilton to the CEO School Summit. Arlen shares her journey from being broke to investing in over 200 companies led by underrepresented founders and the power of being someone else's first yes. Listen to CEO School wherever you get your podcasts. And now, back to the podcast.
My dad really just loved movies, like the movie magic that people talk about. I think he experienced that and felt that deeply from when he was a kid. He told me stories about going to the movie theater when he was a child, like with his grandma, and watching King Kong and all these really early movies, and from the earliest days, basically, is him putting on movies and us watching movies together. And my mom also really liked movies and going to the movies, so we would have family movie nights where we would sit down and watch things, and they would tell me about the first time they saw Star Wars when they were driving around San Francisco in the 70s and saw a bunch of people lined up around the block, and they were like, we have nothing to do, let's get in line and see what everyone's waiting for. and then they end up going inside a theater and watching Star Wars for the first time, and like how big of a deal that was. So I think just movies were a part of their lives, and so became a part of my life, and I immediately gravitated toward filmmaking and that kind of storytelling.
Do you remember ever trying to recreate some of the things that you saw on film? Because now you had access to this video camera. Your dad had showed you how to use it, and I feel like it seems like the natural next step, like for someone who was so invested and so interested, was just like, okay, like how can I make this my own?
Absolutely. Pretty much from the age I could hold the camera to all the way through high school, really. A lot of my free time was spent recreating movies or doing parodies or doing spoofs. And so when I was really young, like in elementary school, I think it was first or second grade, we had to do a book report on James and the Giant Peach. And I had seen the movie, and it was a stop animation movie. And my dad showed me how you could kind of recreate this stop animation effect by using the video camera and pressing record and stop really fast, and then move everything a little bit and then do it again. And so that's what I did my book report as, was this like 5-minute stop animation recreation of James and the Giant Peach movie. I would take my Ninja Turtle toys. They had a Ninja Turtle bus, and I would take my dinosaur Jurassic Park toys, and I would put the camera so that it was recreating, the famous shot from Jurassic Park. It's through the windshield of the car after the T-Rex breaks out, and the T-Rex comes through the windshield and the eye is there. I would recreate that with my toys. In high school, I did basically a parody of Indiana Jones / Star Wars. It was a little loose, but it was, again, taking famous scenes and trying to figure out a way to shoot something similar in our high school locker room or in the quad or whatever it was. So
when you look back at those movies after making them, like, what were your thoughts of them? Was it like, oh my God, this is amazing that I could create this? Or was it like, oh, this is so far from what I had in my head? Because I mean, I feel like when you're a creator early on, sometimes it can be a balance of like taste versus execution, right? Like how much how much of what you want to create do you actually have the skills to create? And I'm wondering if you ever felt that, like, going into high school.
Yeah, I think what you're describing is kind of the journey of becoming a creator and getting better and getting more experience. As a kid, when I was making these things, it felt like I was like almost spot on to the original, right? Like I was creating the same kind of emotional experience that I got when watching the actual thing, because in your brain, your imagination is filling in all these gaps and, doing so much of the heavy lifting. And as I got older, I think you start to see that additional work has to be done because the audience is not inside of your head and their imagination is not going to do what yours did. So how do you actually translate that emotional experience to the screen? And so I think that's, a part of the journey that I think is always ongoing, but was definitely a big shift. I remember kind of middle school into high school is me trying to go from, I'm just shooting things that I think are fun and recreating these moments, to let me actually study some of these movies and pick up on the craft and do some analysis so that I can more accurately be representing and conveying what I'm going for.
So who did you start to study? Like, I mean, I think of in my just like creator journey, like I'm studying like a lot of YouTubers and like picking apart their like second by second, what are they doing in each moment. And so I'm wondering, like were you picking apart your favorite movies, like listening to like DVD commentaries behind the scenes? Like how are you actually constructing your taste and your ability to actually make that taste a something that you could execute?
Yeah, so I started high school I think in 2000, and so DVDs and DVD commentaries were a new thing, but was this crazy resource that hadn't existed before. And so a lot of my early learning came from watching The Matrix or American Beauty with audio commentary or Fight Club. I was really into Moulin Rouge and Baz Luhrmann's like Romeo and Juliet. And so there was kind of any movie I could get my hands on that had a DVD commentary, I would watch and listen. But I remember especially American Beauty was a big one for me in terms of cinematography and like the role of a director. And, you know, I would borrow from the internet rips of these DVDs so that I could have them on my computer and do a freeze frame. And I would just print out, oh, this shot is cool, and that shot is cool, and that shot is cool, and have them on a piece of paper so I could look at them. And that's kind of how I taught myself the 180-degree rule of filming, where I just naturally, when watching, well, this is how they're shooting a conversation. It's interesting how the camera's always on this side of, you know, the shoulder of these two people talking. So yeah, all the movies of that era that were out on DVD, I would meticulously go through and try to extract information from.
And so after like the extraction process, right, there's the actually trying to make it, right? So where did you start? Did you start just, you know, putting together feature-length films, or did you start with scripts? How did you start to apply some of this knowledge that you were learning?
So really early on, like middle school, it was a lot of, I have these things in my head and I'm just going to grab a camera and grab some friends and we're going to shoot stuff and make it up as we go. And then by early high school, I was embracing the idea that, well, you have to write a script first so that you know what you're going to be shooting. And by the end of high school, I decided I wanted to make a feature film. And so that's where a lot of these ideas, how they were expressed and further like investigated by me, was in creating and designing a feature film that I wanted to make with friends.
How did you come up with that idea? Like, do you remember like where and the thought process of like, okay, I want to create a feature film?
Yeah, there was a moment I remember, I think I was in calculus class and not really paying attention, and it was also drawing logos. It was just like drawing weird designs or like catchphrases or, you know, like lines that would appear in a trailer, because I was really into trailers, and so I would be making trailers for these.
What were some of the
in my
lines?
head. So the big tagline was 4 people, 2 stories, 1 incredible movie. And I was like, oh, that's great. I'm going to call this movie 421, which is not a good name and has nothing to do with the plot of what it was. But it was, I had at that point kind of already been thinking about, I want to do something bigger and better, because like 9th grade, I made a 10-minute movie that was pretty cool and got friends excited. And so the next year I made a 40-minute movie that got people excited. And so junior year, going into senior year, I was like, well, the next step is to make a feature film, and why not? Let's do it. And so it was kind of something that was on my mind a lot, I think, my junior year of high school. And then senior year, it was like, let's just do it. Like, why not? And so it felt like the natural evolution from these kind of shorter films that I'd been making that were getting longer and more complex over time.
What did it actually look like embarking on that?
Yeah, it was a very long process, and I learned a lot. And there were kind of 2 phases that I would break it up into. So the first phase was very much me in high school, between class, sometimes during class, after school, sitting down and just writing ideas for the story. And I was really into The Matrix and what else? I'd seen like The Godfather and The Usual Suspects. So I was really like inspired by like crime assassin movie stuff. So it was kind of just writing free flowing, like this is what the story could be. And sometimes it'd be involving friends of mine and we talk about ideas and all this stuff. But over time we got a script, and then it was basically that summer, I would make a schedule. I would just do the things you need to do of like, okay, we're going to pick this day and we're going to shoot this scene because we can get this friend's house and like their parents are out of town. So we'll shoot that scene then. And then it just kind of kept happening organically. And then I would be like, well, I should make a shot list and I should make storyboards and all this stuff. So phase one was very much just throwing things at the wall and taking a first step and then following the momentum of it as it happened.
And when did it come to, I guess, like a culmination? When did you feel you actually had something?
So the short version is we did a first pass and shot a feature film, and I edited it all together, and it didn't make any sense, and it was bad. But we couldn't really fix any of it because half of my friends had gone away to college. And so I basically spent a year breaking it down and breaking it apart and trying to re-edit things and see like what happens if I take the ending and put it at the beginning, and what if I rewrite this? And so it was really in this dissecting what had been done and trying to figure out how to make it better that I learned some of the most important lessons of storytelling and filmmaking, and realizing, oh, there's not really a good structure here. And this is a 20-minute section where nothing happens and it's boring. So maybe something should happen then. So like all these really base fundamental things. So I basically spent a year kind of rewriting it. And then the next summer when my friends were back from college, we reshot it. And then kind of halfway through my first year of college, we finished it and premiered it. And it was this 90-minute feature film that was goofy and weird, but surprisingly felt like a movie and felt like a really big accomplishment.
What was that premiere like? Like, what did it feel like?
It was like one of the most exciting evenings of my life. And so somehow we got the big auditorium of our nearby like community college. So we like reserved that out. It's like a 200-person thing. We invited everybody, like all of our friends that had been in it, but also all of their parents who had been following the saga, because we're shooting in everybody's houses and people are driving us places and all these things. And so it was like close friends' parents, and then like all these peers, like people that I'd gone to school with. Like a big chunk of our like high school class showed up because people had been hearing about us making this movie for years, basically at that point. And yeah, I just remember the lights coming down, and I walk out in front of it, at the front of the screen and stage to introduce it along with the main stars. And yeah, it felt like a movie premiere. It felt like we had like done something like real. But yeah, and then we played it, and it was there were people laughed when they were supposed to laugh and shifted in boredom at certain times, but by the end you could like feel the energy in the room where everyone was paying attention and like surprisingly invested in the story. And then it ends, and then everyone gives it like a standing ovation because it's parents and they're proud, but also just all the stuff. And so it was just a really incredible, like, wow, we made a thing, and seeing it with an audience and feeling that energy was amazing.
That's beautiful. I mean, it takes a lot of courage to start on an endeavor that big, but to actually see it through. Like, I mean, there's so many other skills and that come into play, and to do that so young, like that's a huge accomplishment. And so how are you thinking about like turning this into an actual career as you're going through college?
Yeah, I wish I had more of a plan while it was happening. I think it was coming out of high school, like you're saying, I knew I wanted to make movies, so I knew I wanted to go to a film school. Went to UC Santa Cruz that had this really great film theory program and enough of a production concentration that I could keep making movies and find other filmmakers that I was excited about. During this time, I also had made a friend, Michael Coleman, who was a few years older than me, and he had made some industry contacts through the school that he went to. And so he was a bit more connected and starting up this video series called Soundworks Collection, which was a interview series where we would go and interview the sound designers and sound mixers working in the industry and create little video vignettes, kind of like behind the scenes videos of each movie and the work that they were doing. And so I'd been working with him doing random gigs and video shoots. And as he was starting this project up, I was part of the founding of that, which is really exciting. And so that seemed like a potential avenue of like, well, if I keep working with him, then like maybe a cool opportunity will happen. And meanwhile, some of the friends that I had met in college were planning to move to LA. And I was like, well, yeah, at some point, maybe I'll move to LA. But honestly, coming out of college, I didn't really have a good plan. And I kind of moved back home and spent 2 years not really moving forward in any kind of meaningful way.
What did it feel like to graduate and move back home in that moment?
It was kind of surreal. Like I've always liked my home, and a lot of my friends were still there, so it felt Santa Cruz was not very far away from where I grew up, so I was already going back and forth to home pretty frequently. So on one hand, it was really fun because it was me in my early 20s with all of my friends that I grew up with, and they were getting apartments, and so we were hanging out not at our parents' places for the first time, and so it was a really fun time. But career-wise, there wasn't a whole lot of forward movement. Like I'd made some films in college, and those had, one of them ended up going to the National Film Festival for Talented Youth, I think it's called, and that was in Seattle, and so we went to that film festival and it premiered and it won like Best Feature there. And so there are these little paths that seemed like, well, maybe that happens, and then someone walks up and says, here's a ticket to a movie career. Good work. But that never happened. So yeah, that period post-college was a weird time because there wasn't a ton of directionality. I felt like I had tried some things, but none of it had really materialized. And so it was a lot of hanging out and trying to figure out what the best next step would be.
I guess as you're going towards the end of those 2 years, how are you feeling, and when do you at what point and why do you feel like you need to make a shift from maybe it was something that was like more of like a plateau or some stasis?
Yeah, I think I didn't feel stasis because I was always making something. Like my friends and I were always coming up with some idea or some short to make. And at some points in there was even like, oh, what if we did a feature that was this, or a web series that was that? But I think the problem and the growing that I had to do, and this came from, friends and new peers that I had met, was, I couldn't just make movies for my friends for forever. And I think I emotionally probably could have done that. But to get a career, you do have to make something that other people can watch and appreciate. And so I think if there was a stasis, it was a creative stasis of me just wanting to keep making movies with my friends and slowly accepting it's time to leave the small pond behind and move to LA and try to like really learn to swim in the big leagues and figure out how to make a movie that looks and feels professional and that will be taken seriously by strangers and not just friends and family, that kind of thing.
Was there a moment where you made that decision?
Yeah, it was an ongoing conversation in my head for probably a year, but my good friend Scott Martin and I visited some of his friends in LA for his birthday, I think in September of 2009. And that was kind of the first time I really went to LA and met his friends. My friends from college had moved down at that time. And so that was like a really cool long weekend glimpse of what life could be like in LA. And it was going to all these cool places where you're going to Griffith Park and there's the Hollywood sign, or going to their, Hollywood apartment and having parties all night, but like watching movies. And then we can go to the ArcLight where they're doing this special screening of this movie. And I got a little bit of the taste of like the culture and the energy that comes from being in the town, in the place where it happens. And pretty much after that trip, I was like, okay, I need to move down to LA. It took me another year to get there, but September of 2009 was when I think the switch got thrown in my brain.
So you decide to move to LA. How are you thinking about living? Because LA is not the cheapest city in the world. And so what were you looking for in terms of jobs to pay rent and eat?
Yeah. So I am fortunate to have had a pretty sheltered, easy childhood growing up, and never, pretty squarely middle class. And my parents had enough money to let me run around with a video camera as a kid, even though I might break it. So yeah, I hadn't really ever thought about how you pay for things like that. I had, as I mentioned, been working with my friend Michael Coleman, doing some of this like video work and these video shoots. And some of those shoots that we'd been doing, even when I was living in NorCal, were down in Southern California. So I had a vague sense of, well, I can keep doing that work and I can kind of edit remotely. And if I find a really cheap apartment, I'll figure it out. But yeah, honestly, the first couple of years was a combination of random editing gigs that would just come from, I know this person that knows this person that needs some weird After Effects animation created for some crazy thing, and they'll pay you $100 for it, and be like, oh, okay. And if you do enough of that, you get some money. But also, my parents were encouraging enough to kind of subsidize my rent for a little bit also, and soften that transitional period as I slowly realized what it meant to be an adult.
I was wondering if you have any thoughts on like getting a job to pay the bills versus getting a job, like trying to keep a job and pretty close to the work that you want.
Yeah, there are a lot of pros and cons to having your day job be similar to what your passion is. And some of the pros that I found was I would be doing these odd jobs that weren't maybe exactly what I wanted to do, but were using and honing skills that would go toward what I ultimately wanted to do. So I would be doing motion graphics animation for, some Google presentation for a friend of a friend. And it was just animating, like slides moving around, and it wasn't that exciting. But spending time learning how to do that well really paid off later when I was doing lessons from the Screenplay and suddenly needed to know how to do motion graphics. The cons that can happen is if you're literally doing your passion as your day job, then often the last thing you want to do at the end of a long work day is keep doing that kind of thing. So if you've been writing all day and using your brain to generate ideas for this day job, then at the end of the day, you might be, you've squeezed all the juice out of that, and it's harder to get excited about your own projects. And so I think that's a balance that everyone should keep in mind when they're trying to figure out what their day job is going to be.
Yeah, I guess like dive a little bit more into the emotional state post doing like building that, because it seems like I don't know, you're just like you're hustling and you're putting it out, and then you're met with like roadblock after roadblock. And I'm like how do you summon the I guess like courage and energy to just go out and do it again? What is the process of building yourself back up to the point where you can start moving forward? We'll get back to the podcast right after this break. While you're listening to this podcast, you're probably doing something else too, like mastering the art of working out, shaving like no one's watching. We get it. When you're having conversations with your customers, the same is probably true for them. They're slacking their teams, mentally planning date nights, so growing conversation beyond the moment can be challenging. HubSpot helps you go beyond the moment by connecting you and your team so you can access the exact same data and see the full customer picture, what motivates them, what their expectations are, and how you can blow them out of the water. With powerful tools that connect marketing, sales, ops, and service, HubSpot's powerful CRM platform powers you and your teams to transform customer moments into extraordinary customer experiences. Learn how HubSpot can help your business grow better at HubSpot.com. And now, back to the podcast.
I think that was a somewhat darker period where it did feel like the path that we were on was great. We'd put aside other parts of life to focus on this, and then it all fell apart. Where are we? And again, like, I'm out of money. I don't have any savings left. What do I do? Yeah, basically what I ended up having to do was just do a lot more editing work and gig work. And luckily, Alex Calleros, who is my creative partner, who I've mentioned a couple times, had a really strong relationship with different documentary companies in LA and had edited several documentaries. And so we kind of shifted our production company from we're making these short films to we will edit your documentaries for you because we need money. And we ended up editing a documentary feature together called Being George Clooney, which was all about all the different voice actors around the world that dub George Clooney's voice in different movies. And so it was about film. It was a fun subject, and it was cool to work on it together.
I imagine because you're working on this documentary and probably doing a good job, that leads to the esports documentary, right?
Essentially, yeah. So we complete that George Clooney documentary, and through friends of friends and people we know, we are introduced to a guy who's creating an esports team, a League of Legends team. And he's really excited about it because they're going to do things totally differently, and they're going to spend a bunch of money on it and kind of treating it like a tech startup. And all the players are going to have like a personal chef that like cooks for them. So they're in top physical shape, and they're going to have exercise routines. And it's like,
That sounds expensive. A personal chef for every player.
there was a lot of money behind it, which was exciting, obviously, for us. And so essentially the idea was we want you to follow this team over the next like 9 months, record all the big moments of downtime, and we're going to put together either a web series or a feature or something about the rise of this esports team. And you guys are the ones like in charge of all of it.
Was this funded by the esports team?
The founder of this team had gone out and like raised all this money. And so, so it was all funded by this team. They were like, that's how much money they had. It's like, we're going to carve out, a chunk of money just for a documentary. And it was really exciting. It felt like there was a lot of, enthusiasm around it in the community. And I'm a gamer. I love, esports. And so I wasn't as familiar with League of Legends, but I was like, I can get into this. Like, I like gaming. This is cool. And it will definitely employ us for a long period of time. So it felt like this was a cool next step. And I was, excited about where it could potentially go.
What actually happens as you pursue this path?
That was definitely a choice in my mind of like, am I saying goodbye to narrative film by doing this? Whether it means I go into documentaries or just simply, I need to make money, and so I'm going to do whatever makes money versus like pursue creative passion. And this was okay, I like running a business. I like being a production company, and we'll be a production company that does documentaries. Cool. Let's pursue this for a while. And so, so we commit to it, and we're shooting it. We're traveling to San Francisco where they take the players to go watch, 49ers game. And then we're going over to the west side of LA where they have their office in a WeWork, and we're shooting in this WeWork. And it's really...
I'm in a WeWork right now.
Can you imagine a team of, like 5 16-year-olds yelling at each other as they're doing a team sport amongst all of the adults trying to get work done in WeWork? They got kicked out of the WeWork is what happened. So there was like momentum and excitement, and it was all building up to the kind of the first playoff game that they were going to do. And so and it was pretty exciting to film these moments because it's a game, it's a sports game, and so you're following the score and like getting reaction shots of the players as they're like really excited or really sad. And so it was like the big first playoff game. There was rumors that some very rich people that were going to potentially invest in it were watching the results. So it was like a very high pressure, high stakes thing. And the team totally got crushed in that game. And so essentially all the funding plug was pulled by all the investors, like immediately, like almost overnight, where it's like, we spent how much money on all of this and you guys just lost in this first playoff game? I don't think so. I'm pulling all my money. And so it went from this is going to be the thing we're working on for the next like year. It's going to be exciting. It's going to pay all of our bills to never mind, it's over, the end.
How long was the run?
3 months, 3 or 4 months, maybe. I think we started in like December of 2015, I want to say. And it was like March of 20.
Were they just actually not good? Did something happen? Like how did they fail so quickly?
I'm not an expert on League of Legends playing. I think there was...
But you did make the documentary up until that point. You had the inside scoop.
There was a lot of pressure, and I think it wasn't fair to put all that pressure on them, and it was definitely a dramatic move to pull all the funding after this one thing.
So once again, you are... a project has been pulled out from under your feet. What are you feeling?
So I was very sad at the time. I think there was just this sadness was amplified by the fact that I was like about to turn 30. And so, when you're 25 and you have a blowback, it's like, I'm still young. There's still a lot to do. But like turning 30 was looming in my brain. And so it was like, I'm about to turn 30. The main prospect that I had has now been, destroyed and taken away. What do I do? And a lot of my friends at that point, people that had moved down to LA to pursue acting or directing or writing, whatever it was, were also feeling the 30ness looming, and were making some choices of like, I'm going to move back home actually, or I'm going to go back to school to study this thing. And so there was kind of a little bit of a feeling where this is the time of like, do you double down on your dreams, or do you make a more perhaps rational decision of like pursuing other careers? And so while it felt super sad at the time, it ended up being maybe the best thing that's ever happened to me. Because in this downtime, I suddenly had all this free time. I had worked enough now that I'd saved up some money, and facing this kind of choice moment, I was like, well, I really want to get back to like the thing I care about, like narrative filmmaking and that kind of creative outlet that I love. So why don't I turn my attention back to where I left off? And so, looking back at where I had left off was this failed pilot, and kind of the takeaway being cool, clever ideas, but there are some writing fundamentals that just aren't working yet. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to use this time to focus on improving my screenwriting. And so that took the form of, I'm going to get a bunch of screenplays and start reading them all. And I'm going to start taking notes. And then as I start taking notes, I'm like, oh, maybe I could do like a blog post series where I'm, collecting all of the lessons that I'm learning, and I'll share it as a blog post and kind of break the scripts down, and that will make me learn it, but also like be sharing it with people. And so as I start writing the blog post for the first one, I'm like, well, wait a minute. I've been watching a lot of YouTube, and there are these video essays. I love Every Frame a Painting and Captain Christian, Nerdwriter. I could do a video essay. So maybe this blog post that I'm writing for Gone Girl could actually be a video essay. And that's kind of where the idea for Lessons from the Screenplay leapt into my brain.
So you have this idea for the blog. You're like, I'm going to turn this into a video. You already have a little bit of experience in YouTube because you've done your short films and the web series. It is going to be an investment, right? It's not like the first video that you put in isn't necessarily going to be the one that launches you into the stratosphere, right? What are your expectations going into launching this YouTube channel?
Part of this moment for me was trying to be really disciplined and adult about my decision making. And so, as you said, I had some experience now with YouTube, and that was 5 years in the past at this moment. YouTube had changed. Patreon was a thing. And so I was trying to be really like smart about this. We're like, if I'm going to put time and energy into this thing, I need to see a pathway, like be able to see a pathway to this being like a sustainable, like full-time job. And even if that's crazy, which it is, I need to treat it like that. I had learned, especially from, when we were doing finite films, that year of short films, we were also making production diaries. So we were doing like behind the scenes things that we were releasing every week of us making those videos. And that was fun. But part of the lesson I had learned from all of that was you don't just make a thing and then release it right away. Like, it'd be good to spend time refining it a little bit was the takeaway that I had. And so that first video that I was writing on Gone Girl, I wrote, a 2-minute section of it and then showed the script to some friends and got thoughts and did a rewrite. And then I did that 2-minute section as a video and showed it to friends and got feedback and did a rewrite. And then did a full version of that video and showed it to people and got feedback and did a re-edit of it.
Wow, that is a lot of effort for one YouTube video.
Yeah, but it felt like if I was really gonna do this thing, I wanted to like really like go for it and not kind of trick myself into thinking my first idea was definitely going to be the best idea. That was like another kind of disciplinary lesson that I had learned from this past 10 years of like, I might think I'm great and I have cool ideas, but that can lead me astray pretty quickly. So I want to make sure I'm testing these ideas, and it's not enough for me to think they're cool. I want to be generous and create something that is of value to someone else so that they're not just watching videos so that people can watch my videos, but people are watching this because they're getting something out of that. And so this kind of rigorous testing process was helping ensure that was happening and helping my brain kind of wrap around this process of how do I make sure I'm making a video that is useful for someone to watch. And it was a totally invaluable process, and I learned a lot. And by the end, I felt very confident that I'd created something that was hopefully going to be useful for people, felt unique and like something I was excited and passionate about. And that even if this video didn't blow up, or if the next 10 videos didn't blow up, if it never blew up, going through this process, I was learning a lot and like relearning fundamentals that I'd forgotten, or finally paying attention to like these important story beats that I'd sort of like brushed off in my, ego. I'm a cool director person. I don't need to know about the rules. So it felt like hopefully a win-win scenario where even if it didn't make money, it was still helping me grow as a creator.
So you spent all this time making the video. What was the reception? How did it do?
So I released the first video and it almost immediately showed up on Reddit and took off on Reddit. And I think I had like 8,000 subscribers by the end of the first day, which was more than, Finite Films ever had. Like, that's how small we were.
8,000? What did you start at?
0. Like in one day I went from a channel that had 0 subscribers to, I believe around 8,000. And within 24 to 48 hours, I think the video had like 200,000 views or something. Like it blew up more than I could have imagined. And it was insane.
What are you like? What does that feel like?
Amazing. Like just so like rewarding. The moment that I was
months of actually like putting effort into crafting the video.
Yeah, and I'd like researched. I'd made kind of a YouTube video where I did a visual effects breakdown from 2001: A Space Odyssey, just on like my personal channel, and had posted that to Reddit, and saw that the movie subreddit was really receptive to this kind of analysis of film, and so I had some sense of like I think I'm making something that there's an audience for and that they'll like. I didn't know that they were gonna like it that much, and one of my friends who had been helping on the esports documentary, he was also in a band, and so his band was playing like down the street from my apartment the night that the video was blowing up, and I'd promised that I would go to the show. But I just remember like walking down the street and like taking out my phone and like double checking the subscriber numbers and the view count, and just this feeling of like true excitement of like, oh, this this could be something so amazing, and I'm so excited and grateful in this moment.
A lot of people might look at that and be like, oh, like success overnight, right? You post one video, bam, instantly successful. But the reason you were able to do that is because of everything that came before. And it was a lot of work, and also like the months of you prepping for this one video. That's super exciting. So how do you think about capitalizing on that growth and that momentum? Like, how are you thinking about setting up a adult 30-year-old business to make sure that this isn't a flash in the pan, this isn't one video, this is actually a career that can sustain you?
Before launching, I had a Patreon set up. I had looked at what other creators had as Patreon like perks and rewards. I had actually created my second video before I released the first video, because I wanted to make sure I could replicate the process, and I wanted to, in my head, I was like, I'll always be one video ahead, and so I'll always have one banked, and then I can create a consistent release schedule. That went out the window super fast. But yeah, it was kind of just trying to see what the potential like revenue streams were, and making sure I was set up to kind of, escort those who cared toward that. And pretty quickly people were like signing up on Patreon, and I was like, that was amazing. Like the first time someone's like, I like what you do so much that I'm gonna like give you money to keep doing it, like as an amazing feeling. And also just like weight of responsibility that comes with that, of like, oh my God, now people are like gonna pay me $80 every month to like make something. This has to be amazing. So it was having that infrastructure in place, and then scrambling to try to continue making content that was valuable and that people were liking and listening to feedback. But it was like a kind of excited panic.
Were there any other big turning points? I would love to hear like your first brand deal, first YouTube check, like like some of these these like moments, and maybe any other video that you feel was like pivotal over like the next maybe like 2 years.
Video number 6, or is it 5? 3, 4, 5 was the Dark Knight video, creating the ultimate antagonist. And so the channel had been going well and was like growing slowly, and it was like a modest success. And then releasing the Dark Knight video just like changed everything, because it blew up. It went like truly viral. It was the first video of mine to get like 1 million views, and people were writing blog posts about it and sharing it on Twitter, and it was absolutely unreal. But felt like a confirmation, because the Gone Girl video was like, I think there's something worth pursuing here. Let's keep going, but we don't know for sure yet. And then the Dark Knight was like, okay, this is really cool. People are excited. It's getting a lot of views. It's created a lot of new Patreon people. There's a path forward here that I can feel somewhat confident in. So that was the first big turning point in Lessons from Screenplay.
And how did that translate to revenue? Were you starting to be able to live off of this money? Like when was it? Like when I'm wondering the point where like you're doing like less and less editing gigs and just more and more time on the channel, and what, like, is there a certain point where it's like, okay, like let's just put all of my time here?
Yeah, I mean, so pretty much as soon as I came up with like, I'm going to do a YouTube channel, Lessons from the Screenplay, I stopped doing all gig work to just focus on that research and preparation and iteration. And then Gone Girl did well enough that I was like, okay, I think I need to keep putting all my time into this. So that first year like truly was a race against time, of like my bank account getting lower and lower in savings, and like the Patreon like crawling up just a little bit, and like Patreon plus like the Google AdSense that added together. And I think it was, so the channel launched in May or June of 2016. And I think by October, I was making enough from the videos that it was offsetting my rent. And that was like the first like milestone of like, oh my God, I've reached equilibrium doing this. Like, this is cool.
I am no longer going to be a homeless content creator.
Yes.
I will at least be able to live.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess another moment I'd love to chat about is just like brand deal. Do you remember your first brand deal you did like on the channel and how much that was for?
Yeah, so the first sponsored video was Breaking Bad. And I think that came in early 2017-ish. And I was super nervous about it because I was like, everyone's going to be like, you sold out and I'm unsubscribing and I'm going to burn your house down. So I was really nervous about it. And I think it just, at that time, basically after the Dark Knight video, I started getting emails from people or different YouTube groups and like, we'll represent you and check out the sponsor and that thing. And I kind of just ignored them all. But one group reached out and they felt like a real person in a way that some of the others didn't. And so it was a conversation with them. I think I even met up with them in person and they were like, why don't we try this out? And it'll be, I forget what it was, but it was like a couple $1,000s, I think, which was like huge because, Patreon was like doing well, but this was going to like double or like triple my income potentially. It was enough that it was like, I need to take this seriously and give it a try. And it ultimately went like pretty well and no one, unsubscribed and it wasn't the disaster that I thought it was. But that introduced like a new like pressure to it because sponsors have their own timeline and now
Metrics,
this is
and
like
of success.
New content that needs to be created like for the videos on top of the videos themselves. And so that was an escalation where it was like, okay, I'm not just at equilibrium, but I'm now able to live a life while making these videos. But it did add a lot of stress to the process. And so I was with that group for a while. And then around the time that I released my Game of Thrones video, which was July of 2017, is when I partnered and started working with a company called Standard, who now represents and is kind of a creative collective of like all these really awesome educational YouTubers that I happened to run into them like at VidCon. And it was like, I saw a creator that I liked and I was like, oh my God, I love your stuff. And he was like, I love your stuff. You should come talk to this person. And I was suddenly in this like room with all these creators that I loved. And they were like, we're doing this thing. We're starting this thing. You should be part of it. And I was like, okay. And that was really cool because that, Standard is a whole other conversation, but they're a really cool group and it's like creator founded and kind of creator run. And it created a camaraderie around this kind of stressful part of the process.
The next place I'd love to go is the expansion of the lessons from the Screenplay universe in 2019 when you start Beyond the Screenplay. What led up to that moment?
Yeah, so within probably 2 years of doing the channel, it was super exciting, but super exhausting. I had a couple of moments of burnout where I put so much pressure on myself for each video that if it wasn't the best thing ever, I would, crawl into a ball on the ground and just be like, this is awful. And so
can you describe one of those moments more in detail?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that go into it. For me, it was, I tend to be perfectionistic and I really want everything to be as good as possible. And I feel like that had kind of been established as part of my brand, is like everyone was like, oh, everything's so polished and the editing is so great. That it was like, well, I can't slip or let that go down at all. So that's like a personal need to maintain quality. And then it's kind of this constant, you have to keep creating and coming up with something new and cool. And so I would release a video and there'd be like 8 hours of like relaxation and bliss and like people are leaving comments and I'm like, oh, this is so great. Like, I love this job. And then by the end of the day, I'd be like, but what's the next video on? Like, what's the next really clever thing I need to like figure out? What movie am I going to choose? Like, I need to go watch a bunch of movies. And so there's a lot of pressure and just kind of mental load that is not always heavy, but is always there. So like whatever you're doing, you're always thinking, but I need to be working on the next video, or like, how can I make this better? How can I make that better? Because, and this is one of, the pros of working for yourself and doing YouTube, is that you have total control over your life, and you get to decide when you make money basically and when you don't. And the downside is that it's entirely up to you to decide when you're making money and when you don't. So any moment that you're not working is a conscious choice that you're making to not be moving your brand forward or making money or whatever it is. And so striking that work-life balance, it's surprisingly mentally taxing, because you're just always aware that you could be doing more. And when it's your video and your creation, the Game of Thrones video was a moment where I was like, okay, I really want this video out by the time the new season is starting, because I need it to coincide with that. But like, I don't think I've identified something good yet, so I need to keep working on it. So when you're in that state, and you're not gonna get income or pay the rent if you don't publish a video within this time frame, it's hard to be like, I'm not gonna work this weekend, or like, I'm gonna take 2 days off and just like hang out. Like, there's no mental.
And also the
space for that.
idea stage is so hard, because it's like you could be working all day and have nothing to show for it, or like have very little. Like, creating ideas, it can be like the most and least rewarding part of the process, because like, how do you track that you've actually made progress? And that can definitely feel defeating. So was there a moment that you were like closest to just like, I need to take a break?
Mid 2017, like I was saying, where it's around the Game of Thrones video, I was very exhausted. That's kind of, I scroll over all the published videos and I'm looking at the thumbnails, and I just kind of have like emotional highs and lows attached to each image I see. And like, when I see the Game of Thrones video, into my video on Memento, into my video on Blade Runner, I just remember I was exhausted, not feeling very happy with those videos, and like something needed to change, because that was the first time I felt like I'm letting people down, because these videos aren't as good as they should be, and I don't feel good about it, and I need to figure something else out. And and kind of in that period was around the time I was talking to Vince Major, he is essentially like the producer on all of this. He kind of came on as like a marketing consultant, but really he was just like a friend acquaintance that saw when I released the Gone Girl video and was like, you should send it to this blog. That'll help get you exposure. And I was like, okay. And he was like, you should do this thing. And I was like, okay. And then we just kind of kept that relationship going until he was like an integral part of making and releasing these videos. So around this time is when we were talking. He was like, maybe expanding the team would be good. Like, maybe bringing other people on board to offload some of this mental energy could be a path forward.
As a perfectionist, delegation is difficult. How did you start delegating?
Was very much a struggle for me, to even think about how do I find someone that I would trust to do this. And yeah, honestly, it was a struggle, and it never really stopped being a struggle. It just kind of changed, the amplitude of struggle, or the different kind of struggle. And so it was just it was tapping into this well that I have of like bravery that I try. It's very hard to get to. There's a lot of like defense mechanisms up that I have to go through before I'm like, I'm willing to be vulnerable and take a risk on this thing. But they were the two risks that I took, and it ended up paying off really, really greatly in a lot of different ways.
6 months ago is the last, like, what's new on my other channels. But 11 months ago was the Mass Effect should be the next Game of Thrones, like the last like official post on lessons from the screenplay. What happened?
Yeah, several things happened. So yeah, at that point it had been like 4.5 or 5 years that I've been doing the channel. And something I did early on was kind of create a loose roadmap for myself of like, after a year of lessons from the screenplay, I'll start writing a screenplay. And then by year 3, I'll have completed that screenplay and I'll be ready to go and direct like my first feature. And years had blown past that goal. And essentially what I realized is that doing a YouTube channel was a full-time job. And getting back to this idea of don't make your day job your passion, spending all day thinking about film, analyzing film, and writing about film meant that when I got done with my lessons from the screenplay work, which, as I've talked about, was hard to arrive at that stage anyway of deciding that I was done with that work, I had no mental energy left to actually go and write a screenplay. And so I'd been doing all this work and improving my knowledge of screenwriting and structure and all these like deficits that I felt I had years before. I was like, I feel ready now. I feel like I know so much more and I have this thing and I want to wield it and create something again. But I can't do that while I'm full-time doing this YouTube channel. So that was the exhausting path I was on, and arrived at this decision of I'm going to pause the channel like fully, completely, and just go off. And Alex and I are going to write a screenplay, and that's going to be my full-time job for a while.
So that's scary.
It was super scary. That's why I hadn't done it for, the 2 years after I said I would, was like, it doesn't make sense. And the channel keeps getting bigger. I just hit 1 million subscribers. That's insane to stop this thing or pause this thing. I'm bringing on a team, and like I'll offload the work to the team, and then I'll have some space. But that kind of just changed how I was using my time, and it was much more fun to create it as a team, but it was still a full-time job. And so, yeah, it was a very difficult decision, but it felt like the right time to do it. And if it wasn't, if not then, when?
What are you doing now?
So
where's the screenplay? What are the projects that you're working on? What does your life look like right now?
So a year later, Alex and I have essentially completed a full draft of the screenplay that we are very excited about. We've gotten feedback on it. People are like very positive, and we're sort of getting ready to take that out. That was, kind of one of the other things that happened was as I was doing lessons from the screenplay, these industry people and agents were reaching out to me, and that was something that was new, right? Because before it was, when we were doing Anamnesis, this one person was like, maybe there's hope here, and then we hung all of our hopes and dreams on this one thing this one person said. So to be in this position where people are coming to you and saying, like, what do you have? I'd love to read your script, and like all of that, it was really great. And then frustrating because it was like, well, I don't have a script because I haven't written one in a long time. And then the other kind of unforeseen thing was, as you mentioned, that last video was called Why Mass Effect Should Be the Next Game of Thrones. Mass Effect is this epic sci-fi saga video game series. It's my favorite video game series of all time. And Alex and I had made this video about how we love it and how it could be adapted to Game of Thrones and how we're just excited for the franchise to continue. And long story short, and through a series of happenstance, I am now working with BioWare, the company that makes Mass Effect, and working with them on the next installment of the Mass Effect franchise, which is very exciting.
So looking back at this whole saga, your life up until this point, what advice do you think you would give someone in maybe like the position that you once were, maybe had like ventured on making some of their first content and just thinking about creating more, or started working on a couple projects and some of them like fell through? Like, what advice would you give to maybe not yourself, but someone in a similar position that wants to create content and become a creator and a writer? Like, what advice would you give to that person?
When I started Lessons from the Screenplay, that was utilizing a bunch of skills that I'd kind of collected via happenstance over the past 10 years of my life, doing the random things that I was doing. And so I think as a creator, just being aware of that. And as we talked about, designing periods of your life where you're creating something and even if no one watches it, you've learned something, like there's intrinsic value. I think that's just a really smart way to think about how to like manage your time and direct yourself. And then I think the other thing, I look back at when I was turning 30 and right before launching Lessons from the Screenplay, and I think something that changed was that I really internalized the idea of discipline when being a creative person, and understanding that being good takes a lot of work, and that can feel scary and intimidating. But I think the mental shift that happened for me was that's actually really exciting and means that it's doable. Like your heroes that are working in the industry and are super talented, it's not like they're crazy superhumans genetically engineered to be the only person that could do this thing. They've just put in a lot of work to get really good at this thing. And so that means you can too. And so, yeah, that mental shift of how do I bring some discipline into my creative process to make sure that it's still fun and rewarding and a creative expression, but that I'm finding ways to constantly test myself and get a little bit better and a little bit better. That mindset has really served me very well these last few years.